G'day guys, today we're going to change the timing belt and the water pump. We'll be changing both. I've bought a kit that comes with both, so I'll run through what's in the kit and then we'll get into it. The reason we're doing this is because the timing belt's due. This has just gone over 200,000 kilometres. You're supposed to do it roughly every 120,000 Ks. With all the timing belt covers off, you gain access to the crankshaft and camshaft oil seals. I suspect that I have a leak out of one, if not both of those. So I'm going to change both anyway, while I have everything apart, because it's a pain to get access to it. And because we're changing the water pump as well, we're going to lose all of the coolant from the car, so we're just going to replace everything. Because the coolant's drained, we're going to do the thermostat. So timing belt, water pump, thermostat, camshaft seal, crankshaft seal, and I'll break it up into different videos, but that is basically what we're running through today. So the kit that I've got is here, timing component kit. Looks like a tensioner here, timing belt, water pump, gasket for water pump, and it also came with these, which appear to be seals of some sort. Just a quick look at the engine layout so you know where the timing belt is. This side here, this black cover, is the timing belt cover. So a lot of this stuff's going to have to come out because we need access in here. And I've also removed the front right wheel. So I've got the car jacked up here. You don't have to have the whole thing on stands. I just find this easier to access underneath. And this is where we'll get access to as well, taking off this splash guard. Some of the power steering components will have to be moved out of the way. So a lot of this job is just trying to remove everything in the correct order and put everything back in the correct order. I'm using this workshop manual. This is going to briefly explain how to remove your timing belt and your crankshaft seal. It has a few details about the water pump as well. So that's where I'm going to get the outline of what I have to do. The torque settings will all come from this book. This is a Haynes book. It is a little bit helpful, but they're lacking in a lot of ways as well. Anything I can't find in the book, I will try and suss out myself. The illustrations are the most helpful. Once you know where it is, you get a general idea of what you need to move out the way to get access to it. Underneath the car at the moment, the jack stand with a block of wood is just resting on the sump. It's not taking any weight. The car's on 4 jack stands, all corners. So this step here is to do with some of the bolts that won't come out unless you raise or lower the engine to certain positions. It's not supporting the weight of the car. Two 12mm in here. So the two 12mm are removed. Just putting the bolts back in, finger tight wherever I can, because there's going to be a lot of bolts removed for this job. It'll keep everything organised and easier to trace. Before we go any further, we will remove the neutral clamp. The instructions get pretty poor at this stage, but I think what it's suggesting is that we remove all these bolts for the power steering pump and air conditioning brackets that go on this engine mount here. So I'm just going to take all these off, 12mm. So the book doesn't give a lot of instructions, but I'm just going to take things off here that I think might be in the way, and that way hopefully we can clear the area to get this timing belt cover. Alright guys, next step is to remove the power steering and the alternator drive belts. So just quickly, so that can be done with 2 different tensioner bolts. First, the power steering air conditioner belt has to come off, so I've got a full video going into that, but I'm going to loosen that bolt down there, and then this bolt here is the tensioner for the alternator, which comes off afterwards. We have this arrangement here is the tensioner, and on the back of the alternator from underneath, that is a pivot bolt that allows the alternator to pivot, which releases the tension. So I'm just going to start with that. So I undid that, and now I'm undoing this as the tensioner. That belt should come off. Alright, just underneath the car there. That nut there is the pivot nut. That's what we're going to undo before we go back up top and undo those tensioners. So these are 12mm on the alternator. This here, I think, is the camshaft position sensor. We just want to unclip this and remove it. And it says to remove the nuts and bolts from the engine mount support bracket to the engine mount. So we'll take all this out and try to get this out of the way. So these are 14mm, and we've got the engine supported. So to get this engine mount off, so this engine mount here has a bolt through here. The nut is on this side, I've just got the breaker bar on it. It's a 19mm. Bolt head itself is in here. So that's the bolt we're trying to remove. I'll have to remove this as well. So I've unbolted this, two 10mm, and you'll see why. Just now I can lift this and get that bolt out. I'm also going to take this off, two 12mm. Not for any particular reason, but I think I might need to move it out of the way later, so I'm just going to take that off now. So you can see this has had some sort of Loctite put on it, so we'll make sure we put Loctite on again. But explain why we needed the breaker bar to get it off. Now we can lift this out. So this has arrows on it on both sides. Just make sure we put it back in the way we found it. Alright guys, so this engine mount's removed. The workshop manual I have is shit. I have a rough idea of what I need to do. The bracket down here, I think I need to remove. 2 bolts for that. Very poor access. This is where I can sort of jack the engine up or lower it down to get access to these bolts. Because this engine mount is off, I'm not going to be putting pressure on any mounts or anything, so I can jack it up slightly to get to the bolt head, and the other one I might have to lower to get to the bolt head. I can get this bracket off. That goes over to the power steering pump pulley. I believe I'll have to undo that bolt just down there to remove this. This bolt here, holding this wiring loom. That wiring loom runs across the front of the timing belt cover, so I think I'll undo that bolt, get the wire out of the way. Alright guys, so to get this bolt off, this was over the power steering pulley. I've removed the tensioner because I didn't have enough room before to get my spanners in. And now I've lowered the jack to try and get the bolt out. And it only just goes. Trying to get the crankshaft pulley off. 22mm socket with 1/2 inch drive inside. I've tried rattle guns. So I've put the car in gear and I've tried to apply the brakes, which is what is suggested in the manual. I've got a breaker bar with a ratchet attachment, so I can angle it over the breaker bar for extra leverage. Is one piece of the handle for the trolley jack. Now on the inside, the manual says to put the car in 4th gear and then apply the brakes. This took me ages to do, but what I've done with some timber and a bottle jack and a spare paver, I've managed to put enough pressure on the brakes. So before I had a piece of timber from here to the pedal, and I tried to push the seat as far forward as I could, and it just wouldn't hold enough pressure. There was so much tension on the crankshaft pulley that the brakes started to slip. This is the only way I've been able to apply enough pressure on the pedal, and I've just loosened the crankshaft pulley successfully using this method. But anyway, that works if you're in a pinch. So all these cover bolts should be M10. Bit of oil and stuff in there, so we'll give this a clean. And hopefully when we change the camshaft oil seal and the crankshaft oil seal, this will stop the problem from reoccurring. With the brakes applied, I've just taken the bolt out of the crankshaft pulley. Now with any luck I'll be able to pull this off. This pulley wasn't seized on, but it was very tight, so I had to go around with 2 pry bars, sort of pry at 180 degrees and work my way around and down with this one at the same time, and now it's just starting to come off. Now what I'm going to do is start undoing all these bolts. They look like they're M10s. Okay, so here it is with the top cover removed. I'm just going to remove this now. So with the crankshaft pulley out of the way now, I've got better access to this bolt head here. So hopefully I can get this out. And I've got to take the last few bolts out of the cover, and then this will come out. I'll try remove all of this stuff out of the way. So you've got 2 bolts that you access through the holes in this power steering pulley wheel by rotating it around once the belt's off. You just undo the bolts that hold these hoses down here to the body, and the whole thing should hopefully just bend up and out of the way, especially trying to access the water pump and clean the gasket for the water pump. So this is a 14mm. It's on the bottom one there, it's also a 14. The power steering pulley is through here. To move this pipe out of the way, you've got a clamp here and another clamp down here. They were bolted to the body here and down here. I've put the bolts back in. See through the power steering pulley, if you line up your pulley, you've got 2 bolts. One bolt on the back side through that block. See those 2 bolts went through here and here. Now I can't get it any further because of this cable, but it's given me more access through here to get to your water pump and clean the gasket. One thing I'm going to look at before I take the belt off, aligning the camshaft and the crankshaft with the marks on the engine. So this might be hard to point out. There is a mark here and another one on the bottom that I'll show you. They should line up, and that is how you make sure your camshaft and crankshaft are aligned for correct timing, just in case this moves after you take the belt off. Just going to move them into position, and we're going to take this out because that's our tensioner just behind here. So with your timing marks, this point here is the timing mark on the 1.8. I don't have a paint mark, but this little notch here, as you can see, it's different to all of the others. So you can see the teeth in the sprocket. You might be able to see that this one here is a timing mark. This was already in what looks like to be the correct position. I don't know if that is a byproduct of having the car in 4th gear, applying the brakes, and then loosening the pulley bolt down here. I don't know if it locks in at the top dead center position. On the crankshaft pulley, timing mark is this little dot here, and then it's really hard to see the other one because I've got an oil leak. So if we look at the book, we can see that it should line up roughly where it is. So it should line up there. I'd say it is 1 cog off, so I might twist that a bit and see what it looks like up top. So as a bit of insurance, I'm going to mark the belt with a white paint pen at both the timing marks. So I'll mark that there. This one, the timing mark is up here, so I'm actually just going to mark down here as a reference, and then hopefully the new belt is the same. To turn that, I just used this sprocket tool on the camshaft because it was easier access, and then I turned it to where I wanted it. This mark here might look a little bit off just because of the angles. You can't get your head down to the same level, but if you have a straight edge of some sort, you can actually assess better that your timing mark does line up with your little notched sprocket there. So I'm happy with that this is all aligned. You see I've got heaps of oil in here. It's been thrown around by the belt. So I'm going to get this belt off and I'm going to clean everything before I remove the water pump because I don't want any crap going in where the water pump is. So, and then once the belt's off, we can have a go at all this. The other thing I want to do is remove this wiring once the belt's off. Keep that clear of everything before I start spraying brake cleaner. This tensioner, I might take the whole thing out because I'm pretty sure the kit that I have comes with a new one. But otherwise you can lever it out of the way and then retighten that bolt so it is firm in a position where it's not holding tension on the belt. So if you want to take the tension off this, just like that, and then nip up that 12mm. Tension is off the timing belt, that is loose. That is in quite good condition, but it has done 110,000 K, so I'm going to change it anyway. So I'll just compare these, I'll line them up properly and make sure the teeth are all lined up, and then I'll just mark the belt between each point, just in case I have some sort of inconsistency with the timing marks in the engine. I ran my fingers along the entire belt, pinching it together to make sure at no point there was a slight stagger and there was no longer alignment. So it has the exact same amount of teeth and it's the exact same width. So that's all good to go. This tensioner can come off because I think I have a new one in the pack. Take that off and make sure it matches exactly with the new one in the kit. So here's the old tensioner and the new one that we'll be replacing it with. So we reused the bolt and the spring. We're just getting new tensioners. I've given the engine a spray with brake cleaner. I've tried to agitate as much as I could with an old paintbrush, and then I've sprayed it again with brake cleaner. Now I'm using brake cleaner because it evaporates. Try not to get it on painted surfaces. So now we're ready to take off the water pump. Before we do, we're just going to drain the coolant. Going to open that, and then out of here all the coolant will drain. We'll let it drain for a few minutes. Then we'll take the water pump off, move this under the water pump because some more will come out. So we're going to take the radiator cap off. The car is cool, it hasn't been running for a few days. There's no pressure in this line, so this is safe to take off. The reason we're taking this off is so it drains quicker. So in hindsight, you can, if you know you're doing a water pump, you can drain this before the car's jacked up because the trolley jack gets in the way. But you can't move the trolley jack because it's supporting the engine. Drained all the coolant out of the radiator. There's supposed to be a drain plug on the cylinder block, but I can't find it. So I'm going to take the water pump off and just move your drain pan underneath because it's going to splash a bit more. 12mm by the look of it. I'll probably have to take that plate off. So there's 3 10mm on this cover. I'm going to take that off. And the 12mm, they're really hard to break. All the bolts, they're all loose. Now I'm going to get a pry bar on the water pump housing and just pry it open and try to drain all the coolant down into here. So you just want to watch your eyes when you're doing this in case you get coolant splashed up. Put safety glasses on. Alright, so now we can go compare this old water pump with a new one. So I'm just going to clean up around this face and the inside. This is a gasket scraper. So once you think you've adequately scraped away all the old gasket, spray with brake cleaner, give it a wipe down, a nice clean surface. Just comparing the new water pump with the old one, make sure they're exactly the same. And the new one has a gasket which we'll put on, and then we'll mount it in the car. Alright, so this kit comes with a gasket. I don't need to put any gasket paste on here. If you have a kit that doesn't have a gasket, you can use a paste to create a gasket. Got rid of all the old gaskets so you have a clean surface to mate to. Got 4 bolts for the water pump at 24 Newton meters. They are 12mm head. So we've got a few parts to put on that I just want to give a quick clean before they go back on. Get rid of all the old oil. Alright, now we're going to clean. Just going to try to get this little plate on. This was 3 10mm, and if you want to torque these up, it is 11 Newton meters. We can start looking at putting this belt on now with the new tensioner piece that we got. I'll double check this, but I think it's 23 Newton meters when you do it up the final time. We're going to reuse the old spring because the new kit doesn't come with one. We will put the belt back on. We'll check our timing marks, and we'll also check the marks we made in white paint pen on the belt. They should line up with these lined up to the timing mark. Alright, so we've tightened that. Now we'll get the belt on. Okay, so here's the tensioner, and you see it's got this guide pin here. Here's what it pivots on. So now it's loose, we'll put the spring in underneath, and then we can wrap the belt around and make sure the belt lines up with our marks. Spring's in. You just got to force that around this little edge here. It's not too hard to do. Now we want to take the tension off and tighten this so we can get the belt on. That lines up perfectly. I'll put the belt on here and work it around. We don't have tension on at the moment. So make sure you go around your water pump. And then in here we have that timing mark lined up with that little mark at the back. You see that mark on the plate's ever so slightly off from the mark on the body, but that is how it came off. Marking up our paint lines, this is the new belt, copied from the old belt. That makes sure that we have the right amount of length from here through the tensioner and up, rather than having extra length over there, which would be too loose for the water pump. The spring will apply the tension, and then we redo that bolt up at 23 Newton meters. Before you take anything off, it's a good idea to take photos. So this paint mark on the cog here actually rubbed off. So I had to go back through the video footage that I'd taken and count the amount of cog spokes back anti-clockwise and remark it for the belt fitting. So whenever you're doing this sort of stuff, it's good to take some photos. So I've just hung that electrical connection back in. It would have been easier to do that before putting the belt on, but you can get it in just behind the belt. We can release tension. We just want to make sure the belt is on evenly around the whole thing, so it's equal distance. It's not angling towards one cog or the other. It's going to release tension here. Now that spring is applying tension. Once you get your belt on, put the tensioner on and tighten it. So we're going to put the bolt for the crankshaft in, which has the 1/2 inch drive or the 22mm outside. And we want to turn it 2 full rotations, because 2 rotations of the crankshaft is 1 camshaft rotation. So using the timing marks, not the ones we've marked on the belt because they won't line up after 2 turns, but the ones on the body and the sprockets. We're going to do 2 turns of the crank, which should be 1 of the cam. After those 2 turns, make sure you have top dead center on both. So if it doesn't line up, it means the amount of teeth on the belt between the camshaft and the crankshaft is wrong. So it's all out of whack. You'll have to adjust it. Hopefully it'll be off by 1. This is the part that's not explained in the book. You're supposed to take the spark plugs out so you don't have that compression. You feel a tiny bit of tension and then it'll give. That's the engine going through the motions. But with the spark plugs in, it's a lot of tension. It feels like you're about to break something. I've already turned it twice to make sure it's fine, but top dead center, use a straight edge. Now I have removed the spark plugs. Not just the leads, the actual spark plugs are out. And that will stop you getting this compression that feels like you're about to break something. This is the crankshaft. We've put this bolt back in, but without the pulley over it, so we can see the timing marks. I think that should be coming through there. We've got top dead center. So I've got a 22mm, but you can just put a 1/2 inch drive in there. So you'll feel a little bit of resistance, and then the engine will give like that. So that is 1 turn of the crank. But if we look at the camshaft, you'll notice the timing mark is off. So you need to do 2 turns of the crank to do 1 full turn of the cam. If you feel a lot of resistance with the spark plugs out, then you should probably stop and recheck all your marks. So there, the engine gives a bit and spins. If the engine spins past your mark, you can go backwards to line it up, but you don't want to turn the engine backwards. But as far as like going 1/16 of a turn and that, doesn't really matter. We'll line up our timing marks. 2 turns of the crank done. So that timing mark lines up. It might look a little off on camera just because I can't get the lens in there to be level. Now these marks that we did on the belt before, they are really good as a cross-reference the first time that you put it on, or if you have to remove the belt and put it back on, you can put it on with this mark over here. But each time you rotate it, it will move. That doesn't matter. These timing marks are what matters after you start rotating it. But if you need to remove it and reset it, these marks are handy because that should be, if you marked it with the old belt, the same gap from there to the bottom, which would mark that at top dead center and the bottom at top dead center, if that makes sense. Handy for putting the belt on correctly the first time, but this is the defining factor of whether you are correctly timed or not. Spark plugs out makes a world of difference. I did the 2 turns with the spark plugs in and I honestly thought I might have broken something. Now we'll start putting it back together. Get your crankshaft sensor on before you move any further. You probably should do it before you put the belt on, but I managed to sneak it in behind with the belt on. It's not that big a hassle. I just sprayed it with a little bit of contact clean because it was full of oil, and I sprayed the other end as well at the plug there. So the first bracket I'm going to put on is this one. This bit here went over the tensioner pulley. Over here went across to the alternator. This is what the alternator belt tension's on. So we've got all our bolts in loosely. Just remember this top right one has the cable loom clip on it. Cable from the crankshaft sensor comes across here. This one is that little bracket that goes like that, as long as you have fun while you're trying to get it in. So engine mounting right hand side, 1.8, 49 for the bracket bolts and nuts. Through bolt will be 98, but this little 5 here is a little footnote that says you do this 98 with the weight of the engine on the bolt, and the retaining nuts and bolt are 57. So these 3 would be the retaining nuts and bolts at 57. The through bolt obviously with the weight of the engine on there. Bracket nuts and bolts at 49 is what we've just installed here. So if we turn over the page for timing belt, engine mount support bracket, nuts and bolts, 35 Newton meters for the 1.5 and 1.8. I believe that to be this support bracket, so I'm going to do them at 35. The lock nut on the alternator is 23. So we're going to put the lower cover on now. Make sure you got your little grommet with the cable running through that cutout. We've got 5 bolts here, we've got 4 short and 1 longer one. The longer one goes through here, as you can see. Torque settings for all of these is about 11 Newton meters, but I won't bother with these, I'll just do them up with a 1/4 inch firm. Alright guys, bottom cover's in. I'm going to put the engine mount support bracket in. Now I'm just going to lower the engine on the jack to get the bottom bolt in. You really do need to lower the engine quite a lot. And that bolt will slide in. That support bracket's on now. I can refit the tensioner pulley. The bolt's fallen through, but I put the bolt through here and the tensioner pulley goes on there. I took it off to get better access to these bolt heads during the removal stage. I'll refit the power steering pulley, which is the 3 bolts, 2 at the front, 1 at the back. There's the 2 bolts there between the power steering pulley on the 1.8. This bolt here at the back, that's the 3. So here we got this steering pump, 39 Newton meters for those bolts. That's basically it, and then we got the alternator. We'll loosen that pivot bolt, put it back together. Now I've just got to get this arrangement in. This lock bolt and this which will tension the belt. The alternator is in position, ready for the belt to go on and be tensioned. Just want to highlight this. So I've put a little cable tie on here, just to keep this cable away from these bolts that are going to go in. And then I removed this bolt and I redid it with that banjo that holds the cable. And then the last bit for the cable will be in the top left corner of that top cover. Now I'm going to whack this top cover on. There are 4 bolts, they're all the same length, they're all M10. We're going to put this cable through the top left corner. I've got the engine mount to go in now. Just remember, we won't torque this until it is supporting the engine. So I'll just nip that up a little bit before we drop the engine. 57 Newton meters on these 3. So all our engine mounting bolts are tight now, so we're going to lower the jack that's supporting the engine. And then we'll torque this to 98 Newton meters. So the bolt heads are 17, the nut is a 19. Just quickly, power steering on here. This will go on here. This goes down here. This one here to bolt through here. And this clamp here will go through here. Before we put the drive belts on, we need the crankshaft pulley on. So you got your keyway, that goes in there. You got your washer and the bolt that we were using to crank the engine before. So we've got to take that out, put this on, and it's also got a keyway, and then the bolt goes in. So this gets done at 182 Newton meters, it's quite a lot. So 22 mil, or you can go straight in with a 1/2 inch. Now we can put our drive belts on. Alright guys, so we've got the alternator belt on. This locking bolt is 23 Newton meters, and then put the main drive belt on. With everything torqued up and turned on, spark plugs back in. Just remember that we did drain the coolant for the water pump. Make sure your petcock is tight again, and then we'll refill the coolant. G'day guys, today, I hate this man, what are you even doing? After those 2 tans, I'll show you. Anyway, cool story. Torque it when the belt's, whatever, just fucking do that.